everybody. It is so nice to see this group. I'm always fascinated with the power of the internet and bringing people from all different continents together. This is so exciting to have all these amazing researchers from Brazil here today. And we're gonna hear today from Felipe Chiarello. He's gonna talk about constituent dialogues and fundamental rights. We're gonna hear also from Bruna Azari. She's gonna talk about maternity or paternity leave, urgent and fundamental value for development and equality. And for me, being a Brazilian living in the US, it's screaming the differences between the US and Brazil. So this is going to be super, very exciting. Adilson Moreira is going to talk about affirmative action in Brazil between human dignity and social justice. And then Milena Poncho is going to talk about labor's intersection with the pursuit of equity in Brazil. I would like to give just a couple minutes for each one of you to just introduce yourself, and then we can start after that.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2013, and I have been teaching constitutional law, human rights, and anti-discrimination law at Mackenzie since 2015. Actually, I visited Yale. I stayed at Yale as a visiting researcher in 2002, 2003. So it is a pleasure to come back.
And this is such an important presentation because everything that's going with affirmative action. I'm so looking forward to this. Thank you so much for being here today. We're excited about your research.
I prepare a small presentation that I will try to share, but I am not allowed to do that, so it's okay.
I think you can. I think Thomas can give you hosting privileges. No, there you go. Okay, I think you should be able to share.
So I want to explore some aspects of the Brazilian legal debate about affirmative action and its relevance for the discussion of global social justice. Well, Brazil implemented large-scale affirmative action programs in institutions of higher education and in public employment in the last 20 years, measures that generated a significant cultural, political, and legal debate about race relations in the country. One can classify these governmental initiatives as a significant departure from the previous official position of denying the relevance of race in Brazil. Brazil was ruled by a military dictatorship from 64 to 1985, and this political regime embraced racial democracy as the official discourse of race relations in the country. Actually, the military regime had a central role in expanding the national understanding of Brazil as a society based on a public morality, based on the idea of racial cordiality, a kind of discourse that became an important reference in the process of socialization of all racial groups in Brazil. However, the articulation of the Black movement challenged this official narrative. New studies based on quantitative analysis show the presence of widespread discrimination in every single dimension of the Brazilian social life. The late 70s and the early 80s was the moment of the emergence of Black feminism, and Black feminists have, since then, played a significant role in pushing an agenda based on the idea of racial equality. The late 80s and the early 90s saw the beginning of significant cultural transformation, the celebration of Blackness as a distinct group identity and not as a mere trait of national identity that expresses an individual and cultural understanding of Brazilians as a society, as a product of biological and cultural meaning. Importantly, the 1988 Constitution classified racism as a crime, adopted the notions of human dignity, social justice, and citizenship as central principles of the Brazilian legal system. More than recognizing racism and discrimination in general as a major social problem in the country, this legal document implemented the conditions for articulating new constitutional arguments and new forms of legal action aimed at promoting social inclusion of traditionally disadvantaged groups. These legal transformations would play a significant role in dismantling the racial discourses and legal practices that were used for a very long period to dismiss any claims of racial discrimination against Black people. This cultural and constitutional landscape provided racial minorities with legal arguments to pressure local and federal government to promote racially inclusive measures, to create national human rights programs for racial minorities, as well as municipal, state, and national secretaries for the advancement of people of color. Despite the strong protest from whites situated across the whole political spectrum, but especially from right-wing individuals and institutions, the Brazilian government adopted affirmative action programs in public employment, an initiative followed by many institutions of higher education and more recently by many private institutions, including corporations and law firms. Uh, the implementation of affirmative action programs in Brazil, of course, met fierce rejection and condemnation from corporate media, from part of the judicial system, from political and religious leaders, and of course, from the white middle class. Their arguments were based on the traditional representation of Brazil as a society that managed to transcend racial discrimination because of cultural and biological racial mixing. They affirmed that the government was introducing racism in the country, a problem that existed only in the United States. Brazilians are supposedly superior to Americans because the country has never adopted an official system of racial segregation. The legal rhetoric against affirmative action articulates legal principles such as individualism and meritocracy with the idea of racial mixing and cultural uniformity to build an argument based on classification of affirmative action programs as racially discriminatory measures against white people, as a foreign racial discourse and practice incompatible with the Brazilian social history and social ethics, and as a threat to national unity. And some of them have even classified affirmative action as a threat to national security. The Brazilian, I'm sorry. Well, the discourse of racial transcendence continues to influence the public debate about race in Brazil. It has played an important role in the election of Jair Bolsonaro, the fastest president that ruled the country from 2018 to 2022. However, this narrative has been defeated, largely defeated, at least partially in the judicial system. Several Brazilian courts, including the Brazilian Supreme Court, have recognized the relevance of race consciousness in public policies. They have rejected the narrative of racial cordiality and recognized racism as a structural problem in the country. Most significantly, they have identified structural, institutional, and intergeneration discrimination as processes that maintain racial stratification in Brazil, the reason why they cannot adopt formal equality when discussing the legality of racially conscious measures. Moreover, these institutions follow the central aspect of new constitutionalism. They recognize the state as an agent of social transformation and the Constitution as a legal document that aims to promote social inclusion of traditionally disadvantaged groups. For them, the Brazilian Constitution, in deeming human dignity as a structural value, assumes a commitment with the implementation of measures that can ameliorate the situation of racial minorities. In this sense, it is important, affirmed many Brazilian courts, to recognize that our Constitution seeks to promote racial citizenship, a condition for achieving social justice. Of course, the doctrinal classification of social rights as fundamental rights played a central role in this debate. The Black movement constantly claimed that the almost complete absence of Black people in institutions of higher education was a violation of social rights, which includes the right to education. Black people face significant disadvantages because they have to compete with white middle class students who have access to the best private high schools, a reality that create the condition that allow them to pass the very difficult entrance examination exam to public universities, the best institutions of higher education in the country. The Brazilian Supreme Court, more than rejecting the discourse of race neutrality, advanced other important arguments in the struggle for racial equality in the country. First, they rejected the discourse of race transcendence and classified as a strategy for maintaining the reality of racial discrimination intact. Second, the justice who wrote the opinion pointed the structural connection between white privilege and Black disadvantage, which is something unthinkable for the current US Supreme Court, for instance. More specifically, he classified whites as a powerful social group capable of shaping social institutions in order to promote their interests. Significantly, the Brazilian Supreme Court classified Blacks as a historic marginalized group, a situation incompatible with the goal of constructing a society based on the ideas of social justice and human dignity. In this sense, affirmative action programs represent an important governmental initiative capable of promoting an important social transformation, the inclusion of racial minorities. For the Brazilian Supreme Court, human dignity means the recognition of all individuals as persons who deserve the same respect and the creation of material conditions that allow people to create and pursue their life plans. Although Brazilian courts still fail to provide higher level of legal protection to Black people in other areas, especially in criminal law, they have provided important arguments in favor of state positive measures. While American courts center equal protection analysis around the individual through a procedural perspective that disregards the structural forms of discrimination and strategic uses of discourse of race neutrality, Brazilian courts have consistently recognized that the state has an obligation to promote racial inclusion through several initiatives, including affirmative action programs. It is interesting to see how neo-constitutionalism has provided important arguments for advancing racial equality in Brazil. The principles of human dignity and social justice have played an important role in equal protection analysis, such as affirmative action, legal recognition of same-sex unions, the protection and expansion of social rights. In all these cases, the courts claim that the Constitution should be interpreted as a project of social transformation. Of course, this is an approach developed over the years with the growing number of lawsuits brought by social minorities before the Brazilian courts, especially before the Brazilian Supreme Court. These groups, racial minorities, sexual minorities, people with disabilities, indigenous people, women, and the poor, have questioned a series of practices that saw political protection through constitutional principles and through direct actions of constitutionality, direct actions of unconstitutionality, and some other lawsuits. As such, these rulings differ significantly from the current discourse of race relations advanced by the West Supreme Court, which again has centered discourse around the idea that U.S. Constitution protects only individuals. So I think that's it. Thank you for your attention. And again, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so